Welcome to, I suppose, what's kind of a departure for us here at Blues, as today we're going to be diving into I don't know, somewhat controversial topic, if you will, amongst developers, that being the utility and viability of vibe coding or coding using AI tools and services. Admittedly, I think it's safe to say for both TJ and I, we were kind of initially skeptics here, but I also think we've both sort of come around to its inevitability, but more importantly, its utility with some guardrails, of course, which is why we're here today. And cool. First, if you have any questions during the presentation today, you can use the Q&A panel provided in your Zoom UI. As TJ is speaking today, I will actively answer as many questions as I possibly can. If there's time at the end, we'll do more of a public Q&A. Question we always get is it being recorded? Of course it's being recorded, and it'll be available on the Blues YouTube channel at this URL right here. While you're there, if you subscribe, you'll be the first to get alerted when I get around to uploading the video. You'll also get a follow-up email probably on Friday-ish with a link to the recording. So let's start at the very beginning. As Maria in Sound of Music said, it's a very good place to start. Shout out to my Sound of Music fans. I'm sure TJ's shaking his head already.
Yeah.
What even is vibe coding? Well, the term at least was just coined, I believe, a few months ago by Andrej Karpathy, who basically just told us to let AI tooling take the wheel, right? Just tell your LLM to do something. Write an app, build a website, I don't know, create a CLI tool, whatever you need. Accept changes that it makes without reviewing the code. Let it break stuff. If there are errors, just copy and paste those error codes in back to the LLM and let it fix the problems, kind of go with the vibes, I suppose. And while I love this sentiment, anyone who has even remotely dabbled in AI coding knows this as well, that it mostly works, right? We're still dealing with overconfident responses, very convincing hallucinations from our LLMs. We still find ourselves down kind of unrecoverable almost code pathways, but it is improving at an alarming rate. In fact, considering this rate of change, probably most of what we even talk about today is going to be completely obsolete in a matter of months or weeks. I don't know, but we kind of got to start somewhere, right? And if we look back, well, to me, of course, I think vibe coding really, in a way, started when we saw these more advanced code completion models showing up in our favorite IDEs. We kind of became productive almost overnight, not having to look up like method names or property values, whatever it might be. Our IDE started even making some complicated guesses for us, whether it was completing a whole line of code or a block of code. And that grew into this concept of chat coding, which I guess is a subset of vibe coding, but this is really the idea of using AI kind of in a single-threaded manner, if you will. And like low-end chat coding is like what I mostly do today, right? That's kind of having your LLM maybe create a single function for you, have it analyze some code, check for errors, help you debug an issue. On the higher end, you get into more of a conversational back and forth where you actually build a project from scratch, which is what TJ is going to be showing off today. Now, probably the most popular or most well-known chat coding UI is GitHub Copilot, which is built into VS Code, or it's an extension for VS Code. But there are plenty of options out there, like a cursor that TJ is going to show off today, or even using the web or mobile interfaces of like a ChatGPT or a Grok or others that are out there. Now, to me, vibe coding is really going to take off when we start seeing diving into coding agents, if you will. This is a bit beyond of what we're talking about today, but it's kind of an important concept to at least be aware of. So agents can autonomously handle multiple subtasks with multiple disparate systems beyond just the coding part, right? Now, a few of us have experimented with Devon.ai a bit, and while we've had kind of mixed results, we can definitely see the promise of agents. Now, for a simple agent task, which, yes, I'm using simple in quotes here, that might be to tell an agent to like open a Jira ticket, read the context of a bug or issue, maybe do some research on in the repo of it. Maybe it needs to like create a branch in GitHub for its code that it's going to push. Then it's going to open a PR so that the code can be reviewed by a human, ideally. And even this, to me, is pretty wild, right? Like we've got AI spinning up multiple agents that can interface with multiple disparate systems to accomplish a task. So I think things are going to get even more intense as they are than they are today, as we transition kind of from individual developers using their own AI coding agents to instead really controlling AI agent managers who will themselves be controlling any number of like fleets of agents, tens, hundreds, I don't know. It's really almost too hard to process, but the future is now, as they say. And if you are to trust in this chart, it's safe to say we are entering a new world of AI first development. But look at me, I'm getting way too far ahead of myself in this long intro. Suffice it to say, you're here because you're curious about AI coding in the context of building a cloud-based interface on top of these piles, these mountains of data we're accumulating from our connected devices. So let's do some quick introductions. My name is Rob Lauer. I'm Director of Developer Relations here at Blues. But more importantly, with me today is TJ Van Tol. TJ is our Principal Developer Advocate. TJ is going to be providing this deep dive into vibe coding for you all. Now, again, this type of webinar is a bit of a departure for us as we're usually kind of focused on the IoT and wireless connectivity through our company, Blues. And I'd be remiss if I didn't at least mention where we're coming from, just in terms of the data TG is going to be utilizing for the webinar. And that really starts with connecting our product to the cloud. And that really starts with the Blues Notecard. For those of you who are new to Blues and what we do, Notecard is a system-on module, meaning it contains a radio and associated components and circuitry to make it function as a standalone wireless connectivity module. And it's very small, measures 30 by 42 millimeters, making it pretty easy to embed in virtually any product. And what does it do? Well, Notecard adds cloud connectivity to your physical product. I like to think of it as occupying this boring space here, if you will, the middle, right? The part of the cloud enablement that you don't want to deal with. You're good at building your product. You're good at building your cloud application, or maybe you're having AI build your cloud application. We provide that seamless bidirectional data flow between the two. Now, during my time at Blues, I've learned a few things that people get really excited about with regards to the note card. The first is that our cellular note card provides global cellular reach. It also ships prepaid with 500 megs of data and 10 years of service with no monthly SIM fees. If your product sits on the shelf for 3 months, it doesn't cost you anything. You can also literally connect your product to the cloud with 2 lines of JSON code. And Notecard is also very low power, so it idles at 8 to 12 microamps. And there's plenty of Notecard options depending on the radio you need to use. And these are all swappable, both in terms of the physical connector, that M.2 connector at the bottom, and with the API you use. So you use the same API across all radios. So you write one set of firmware and deploy it to all devices. Now, at Blues, the Notecard is only half the story. This is especially important today, as the other half is our cloud service we call Notehub. And the two work together to form what is effectively a device-to-cloud data pump. In practice, what does this mean? Well, a developer is probably going to buy a starter kit from us. They're going to hook up one or more sensors, start reading data with the host MCU, and then deliver that data securely over cellular, over Wi-Fi, LoRa, whatever it may be, to Notehub. And Notehub is then usually going to route that data to their cloud endpoint. So Notehub, yes, it is a cloud service, but we're not trying to create a platform that locks you in. We really exist to help you connect to your platform. Maybe it's AWS or Azure, or, and this is again very important for today, you can use the APIs we provide to programmatically access your data as the source for other cloud-based applications. So that would be the Notehub API. Now, your physical products, they're sending events or notes, as we call them. They are stored in Notehub for routing to a cloud service, or again, through programmatic access via this API. And that's really what the rest of our day is about today, pulling events out of Notehub to build or vibe code a web-based dashboard using these APIs. And with that, I'm going to turn things over to TJ for the meat of our presentation.
Cool. Yeah, and I will just bring up my screen here real quick. We're going to have some fun today. I think this is a lot of fun to work with. And I want to start by just setting a little bit of context. So what we're going to do for the next 30, 40 minutes or so is build a dashboard for this Notehub project that I have. This is a Notehub project that I have deployed throughout my house for monitoring CO2. So these are 4 note cards. They're connected up to some sensors. And every hour, they are publishing events that have CO2, humidity, temperature, and voltage. So what you're looking at right now is the Notehub user interface. This is when you connect a Notecard to the cloud, you see all of your devices, all of your data in our cloud interface. And as Rob mentioned, we have this API for taking data or basically doing any actions that you can see in our user interface, but doing them in a custom application. Now, personally, I come from a web development background. So a big part of my career at Blues, I've been with Blues for almost 4 years, is taking this API and building something like this. So this is one of the first projects that I worked on at Blues, which is creating a dashboard for a product we have called AirNote. So AirNote is air quality monitors we produce. And I wrote this dashboard so you can see your air quality and this little thing. You get a little map, you get some charts and graphs. And this is cool, but this also took me like literal months to build and put together. And so when the vibe coding craze kind of came out, I started it looking into this with a question. And the question is, could I build something like this, but instead of using these APIs directly, instead just vibe code my way there? And the answer is kind of yes, or at least I was able to build considerably more than I thought I would. And that's what I'm going to be doing today is showing you the things I've learned through that process. Now, in terms of tools or what I'll be using to do this, Rob talked about this briefly, but I will be using an editor called Cursor. Cursor is a Visual Studio Code-based editor. They actually forked VS Code to build this. It's available for Mac, for Windows, and for Linux. I'll just briefly in these other tabs, I have some other tools you can use. So GitHub Copilot made by Microsoft, Windsurf, which is made by Codium, Bolt.new from the StackBlitz team, and V0 by Vercel. You notice just even at a glance, these things are all very similar. And what I can tell you, having used all of these, is that they really are more similar than they are different. They're all using the same LLMs under the hood, and they're basically just writing this experience on top of it, where you can talk to some agent. That agent is building code. You go back and forth. So anything you're seeing me doing today, you can do with any of these tools. I like Cursor the best just because I think its tooling, its UX around AI is quite good. And I'll show you some examples of how as we go through this. And I also find that their pricing is nice because they offer a free tier where you can basically, for 2 weeks, do just about anything. So if you're interested by what I'm showing today and you want to try it out for yourself, you can download Cursor, you can sign up for their 2 week free trial and try it out. And once you do, you'll have an interface that looks a little something like this. So this is a completely empty folder that I opened in Cursor. And just to explain the UI sort of at a glance, if you've used Visual Studio Code before, this is going to look pretty familiar, but you have the files for your project, which is currently empty right now here. You have a file editor in the middle. And then the most important part for our purposes today is this panel on the right-hand side is where you chat actually with, in this case, Cursor's agent. And you can use this, as I say, to plan, search, build anything. And when you're vibe coding, this is basically where you're going to spend 99% of your time. In fact, you'll see as I get into this, I'm going to hide some of this other stuff, and we're just pretty much exclusively going to deal with the agent. Now, the last piece of context I'm going to give before I start in on this thing is I'm going to go to my settings in Cursor. So this is just in the preferences menu in Cursor and go to my rules. Cursor has this concept of user rules, and GitHub Copilot has this, Windsurf has this, a lot of these other tools have this as well. But these are rules that you can just send that basically the LLM or the agent should take into account for everything you are doing. And so I have a couple global rules that I've used as I've experimented with these tools that I find just help the agent be more successful, especially when dealing with Notehub projects. So I tell it where the docs are for the Notehub API and Event API. And believe it or not, the agent will go through to those URLs, parse through those docs, and learn a bit about how the APIs work. I have some personal preferences, like I prefer to sort events by default, how timestamps work in the Notehub API, that sort of thing as well. Probably the most important part is this bit, though. The single biggest problematic thing I see when people vibe code is related to security. So oftentimes, if you need to integrate with any sort of service or whatever as part of your projects, you have to have some concept of an API key or a client ID secret or username password or something like that. And you want to be careful that you don't accidentally expose that code to end users. So what I'm giving here is specific instructions. I'm telling it, so when dealing with Notehub, you need a client ID and secret. And I'm telling it to store it in a special file, an env file, and to ignore it from source control. So that's going to help us from exposing things we shouldn't have. And that's just a good practice when you're vibe coding in general. Just be careful about the actual sensitive bits of the projects that you're building. All right. I'm going to close that out. And I'm actually just going to build, we're just going to give this thing our first command. I like to start all my Notehub vibe coding projects with this specific command. So I'm going to tell it to build a web app that reads events from a Notehub project and displays them on the screen. And I like to start here because I just like to have a sanity check to make sure that I'm making the connection to Notehub successfully. That tends to be the hardest part of any of these vibe coding projects is connecting to some external service. There's things that could go wrong. These are steps that are hard for a human to do as well, to make sure you have your keys right, your files in the right place, and that sort of thing. So this provides a good sanity check to make sure, are we seeing events coming back from Notehub successfully? And is that working correctly? And we'll give that a minute. So it's going to break this down into a handful of tasks. So it's going to create a new Next.js project, which is just a common framework for working on the web. And then it's going to start to scaffold out files for us as well. And if it gets stuck, which it might be now, so I should also mention that this demo, the very nature of what I'm doing is non-deterministic. So every time you use these AI tools, something different happens. So I've went through this like 2 or 3 times while preparing for this, and every time I built something different and I'd hit different errors. So we're going to see how this goes. It certainly seems to be stuck on this step. So I'm going to just try and send this one more time and see what happens. We'll see how it goes. Sometimes it gets stuck with, yeah, go ahead, Rob.
Just to be clear, like, and I know this is in the in your cursor rules, but you don't have to use Next.js. Like, you
Yeah.
could tell your AI to use HTML and jQuery or something. Like, it can go, yeah.
Yep. And I am really stuck here. So I'm going to just restart the thing and start it over again. So the one thing you'll find is that these tools are very new and things do absolutely go wrong. Usually they don't go wrong at the very first step. What ends up happening is we'll get an app that just straight up doesn't work. But we'll start this one more time and see what happens. Make sure that this is able to do it. If not, I can create this. I can do the creation step outside of cursor and pop back in and see how it works, or we can skip over to another application because it seems to be stuck on just the creation step.
It's interesting. Wouldn't this be a local?
Yeah, it is. It shouldn't even be going to the agent at all. So sometimes it gets stuck though. So the previous problems I've had, so it's looking for this like okay to proceed. And sometimes the agent gets caught up on just this literal thing, right? Where it needs feedback from the user, a yes. It should be smart enough to handle that, but it doesn't look like it really was in this case. So I had to ask it to do this. So we'll see now if the agent is working now that I've done this. So so now that it's created this, I can go back to say, we'll change this from build a web app to like make this a web app. And we'll see if it's able to. The agent certainly seems to be working. So yeah, it's installing some stuff. We'll see if it, I think, so yeah, it breaks these things down into steps. It looks like it's working now because now it's creating that env file. I think it just got stuck literally on getting the back and forth that yes back from us. So these things are still not the greatest, the most robust tools in the world. But as I've used them, I've kind of gotten used to their eccentricities. How do you pronounce that word? They're just the weird ways that they work. But what you see is what it's doing now. So remember that env file that I told it to create? It built that for us. It's asking for 3 values, my client ID, my client secret, and my project UID. So while this is running and it's scaffolding out our app, we can go to Notehub and grab those. So I'm going to go to my settings. My project UID is here. So I am going to place that here. And then my client ID and client secret, you can generate those by this programmatic API access in your Notehub project. If you generate this, I will do this off screen because I just talked about the importance of keeping these things secret. So it'd be kind of going against that to then immediately reveal them to you all. So the client ID really isn't secret, so I can do that here. But then I will put in the secret off screen and save that and close it out. And we'll see if it's done. So it looks like it's telling me, so great, I set up a complete app. Here's what you need to do to get it running. Update your env file with those credentials. I just did that. And then start my development server. So it's giving me a handy little button that I can run to do that. And it started it. So I should have an app up at localhost 3030. So what I can do is drag my browser back over here and we'll see if this works. And if not, so we have an app. This is running, but we're getting an error that it failed to fetch events, which is pretty common. So what we can do is I'll show you my workflow for when this happens. If I can manage to click this button, there we go. Because typically when this happens, it gives you an error somewhere in here, like, yeah, failed to get Notehub event token. Actually, did I save? I might have. So one problem is in Notehub, when you generate your tokens, if you don't hit the save button, they go away. So let me make sure that I actually saved this real quick, because that's also a common problem. Yeah, I totally didn't. So I've got to update my env file. Do we have any questions, Rob, that came in? Because this is going to take me like 30 seconds monotonously to get up and running.
No, just people providing some helpful suggestions for your initial Next.js issue, but just want everyone to know those are appreciated either in the chat or the Q&A.
Yeah, the fun thing about doing this live is you can tell that I'm like actually doing this. The downside is anything can truly happen. So it's all right though. I'm confident that we're going to be in business this time. So we're going to bring this back up. We are going to restart and we're going to find our app again, or we'll just bring it up over here. And do we have events? No. So we still have an issue with our token. And I did save that, right? I wouldn't have been stupid enough to do that twice. It's the downside of doing things live. I totally did it twice, Rob. I can't believe I did that, but uh sometimes the hardest part is configuration. At least I'm not like totally just publicly sharing these credentials. This time I'm gonna very clearly hit the save button and do this.
I do think it's a tricky part of our Notehub UI that you have to copy those first, copy the values first and then save it. But
It's funny. So, okay, we're in business. We have some data. It's funny that to see the AI struggle on things that humans struggle on. So you might have noticed in my cursor rules, I have to tell it to use the when field and not the capture field from events. And it's funny that the AI gets confused on that because we probably should be using the name captured and not when. And so the AI is kind of picking up on that confusion, which I just find pretty amusing. But at this point, and we would have been here faster if I could have remembered to hit the save button, we are getting data back from Notehub. So essentially, we've taken that events view that we saw in Notehub and we've placed it onto the screen. We're getting data back. And this is what I talked about having a nice sanity check that you are making a connection, that we're getting data back successfully. So at this point, we can start to have a little bit of fun. I am noticing one problem here that our timestamps look off. So I can tell it the timestamps look off. Time stamps from Notehub come back. Time typically this is the workflow when using one of these tools. You just kind of talk to it. So instead of digging into the code, you notice that other than changing that env file, I pretty much won't touch this stuff at all. If you know what you're doing, you can dig in and sort of mess with that stuff. But if you don't, it's usually not a problem until you get into more complex scenarios. Oftentimes you can talk to the AI and get it to fix these things. Now, sometimes it can take a while and it can be pretty frustrating. Sometimes you have to go through several rounds. In this case, it nailed it, it looks like, because that is today. So that looks like just telling it that uh, was able to fix the problem. And knowing a bit about the system that you're working with is okay. So if you notice, the more specific you can be, the better. So I told it that timestamps from Notehub come back in Unix epoch time. So I knew that that's a common thing that people screwed up on. So the AI screwed up on that as well. It just parsed those timestamps incorrectly. But now that we have data, we can start having some fun. So let's say instead of showing a list, instead build, let's say, 4 line charts, one for each field in the body. So that's temp. We'll spell it out. Temperature. Well, I think it comes back as temp. Temp, humidity, voltage, and CO2. On each line chart, show 4 lines, one for each device. And we'll send that in and see what it does with that. I found that these things are quite good at charts. And again, the cool thing, it's going to break this down into tasks. It knows we need some sort of charting library to make this happen. So it's just going to pick one arbitrarily and install it. And then it's going to try to take this data and place it into some charts. And I found it funny going through this process a couple of times. It'll pick different charting libraries each time. It'll pick different, a bunch of different things each time. So let's see. So we have some charts, and we have charts for temperature, humidity, voltage, and CO2. It's looking like it thinks data QO is a device. So again, we're going to have to correct this thing and try to fix it up. But we do have 4 charts. So it did do that successfully. So this is kind of what the back and forth looks like. And so I have to tell it the name of each device is in the SN field that comes back in the root of each event. It looks like you're using the file field currently. Switch to SN for the device name. Because again, being familiar with the API is going to help, because I know that that comes back in the file field of events. And so that's progress. We see dots now. We see what looks like the correct names, because we have office, outside bedroom, living room. My outside temperature is lower, so the data looks correct. It's always good to just spot check to make sure things seem correct, and that certainly looks right. Humidity, voltage, and CO2. It's weird that it's just doing dots and not lines, so I'll have it fix that next. So the charts have dots. The dots should be connected to form a line. We'll see if it's able to fix that. But
TJ,
I do think it's worth
sorry, I was
pausing.
gonna.
Oh yeah, go Rob.
Which model are you? Which model does Cursor use by
So
default?
Cursor was using. You can tell it. Oh, of course, it's does this auto select thing by default right now, which I found works pretty well. Before I was having it use Claude 3.5, and I was messing with 3.7. 3.7 worked a little bit better, but it was really slow. So I was having good luck with 3.5. And at this point now, it's apparently taken over, and it now just auto selects the best model. So I actually don't totally know what it is using. But
That's
that's typically what
interesting.
I've been using. And our
Yeah, I've
dots
never seen it
disappeared.
before.
So I'll tell it the lines are gone now. The other thing I should mention too, so if you get off the rails with these tools, like if you go down 3 or 4 commands and it's totally just screwed something way up. Cursor provides this restore checkpoint situation. So you can always go back and say, like, actually, this was pretty good here, and I just want to go back to that. I'd also recommend being good at source control or learning source control decently well when you're using these tools. So once you get something that is functioning or that you're happy with, it's worth just committing that to source control real quick because once you know that you have something functional saved, it makes it a lot easier to do these things like make up a totally new scenario and let the AI kind of, wreak some havoc upon what you're doing. So because like now it's the line should now be clearly visible on the chart, and the charts are just completely gone. So I'll try one more time, and then I also want to show some things that you can do around making the app look a little bit more professional as well. So the lines on all charts are still gone. I still see the legend fine, but no lines and no dots. And we'll see what it does with that. We did have a few questions come in about like what are the guardrails with vibe coding and what can you and can you not do with these tools. And what I found in my experimentation is that it is really, really good when you have this sort of blank canvas scenario, when you just want to build something from scratch and mess with it, and you have complete free reign to work with it. It gets harder once you get into more complex apps or apps that are a lot more, just when there's a lot more going on. You can still use these tools for this, but they tend to excel at the exact sort of thing I'm doing, where you have this blank canvas, you have this idea, and you want to build from it. Cursor is also the one kind of crazy feature is that you can actually upload screenshots from here. So you can actually quite literally make like a napkin sketch or a piece of paper, write out or draw out what you want to build, or just take like something a designer made here and say, just quite literally say, make the thing look like this. And it does a shockingly good job at doing that. This is another thing you could play with as well. So we have dots. We don't have lines. I'm not going to keep going. Usually with this, you could just keep messing with it, and eventually you'll end up what you want. But at least we have data at this point. So I want to try a few other things. So I'm going to say, make the app look more professional. Give it a header. Give it a name and an icon. Give it a name like this is a trendy startup. And we'll see what it can do, because it's kind of boring, right? Notehub events. And actually, the thing I'm using these tools the most for in my day-to-day job is taking demos that I make and making them just look a little bit better. These tools are very, very good at that. You can just open an existing thing and just say, make this look better, make this look cooler. And so we are now building Sensor Sage, Rob. So we've taken real-time environment intelligence, and we have some environmental metrics. So we got some charts here. We still don't have lines, but you know what? That's okay. We don't really need lines. We have these metrics, and I'm gonna say try one more cool thing here. If anybody has any requests, to let me know, because we can start messing around with this. Rob, if you have any requests or anything you want to see, you can let me know too.
Oh,
So
I'll
I'm
start
gonna tell it.
brainstorming.
What's that?
I'll start thinking about that. I wanted to mention like somebody had a question about like kind of where to get started with the note card as well, and I put it in chat. But if anyone is curious on where to kind of get started, like from the very beginning, I'm the kind of person who likes to look at completed projects and start copying code. And we have on Hackster we have a lot of really nice projects that are well documented. If you want to kind of use those as a basis for getting started with the note card.
Flex.
There's a question about SOC compliance. with using these tools? It's a great question. I have no idea what the answer is, and I think we're since this is new to everybody, I think we're in very much uncharted territory. I do know that uh, GitHub Copilot has a setting that allows you to, oh, what's the setting that annoys me the most, TJ? It
Yeah,
doesn't
it'll
allow
filter
you.
out
Yeah,
public code that or it'll filter out when it finds it's gotten like copyrighted code or code that has a license on it. It'll tell you that you can't use it. And in general, I'd say too, GitHub Copilot is probably your best bet because it's made by Microsoft. It is a little bit more like enterprise oriented than just some of these tools that are built by startups. So I'd probably look there in terms of SOC 2 compliance specifically. I'm not sure.
no. There's some good
Um,
feature requests that have come in. Kimball's asking about putting the charts on different tabs. That's kind of cool.
oh, that's a nice idea. I might try that actually. Let's see if this worked. So if we have some lines, it's like a stair stepping line. I don't, that's a very interesting way of doing this, but great, sure. So I asked it to add filters for different days. Let's see if this works. At a glance, it kind of looks like it worked. Yeah, I don't know why we get stair steppers for the bigger date ranges, but it's kind of cool though, because I mean, at a glance, again, if I were actually using this, I'd want to take a second to verify it, but just my outside one for temperature, right? That sure looks like the correct data for temperatures that's outdoors. CO2, like my office CO2 gets a little high at times. That's actually the main reason why I built this project. So I can see that. So again, this is kind of a little bit flawed. Like I'd probably want to continue talking to this and see what I could do about making these charts more consistent. But at some point, it is worth taking a step back and realizing that, like in a half hour, we took and built a functioning application for seeing some of these charts. And we did so, like I said, other than messing with an env file, we did this completely just using talking to this agent. So let's see, let's switch this to a tab based design. Put each chart on a unique tab. Put the name of the sensor, CO2, in the name of. Just try something out of the blue. I haven't tried tabs before, so I have absolutely no idea what this is going to do. But that's actually one of the cool things about doing this is that it opens you up to this. I find that I am creative in ways that I would never be in real code because even as a web developer, even as someone that's implemented tabs and such before, if I had that thought, I'd be like, oh, but that's going to take me like an hour to figure out how to do and put in there. But with this, like if I were to save this off, I could tell it to do this and it's such low risk, right? If it builds some cool looking tabs, that's great. And let's see, did it do it? So temperature, yeah, look at that. Humidity, voltage,
With the
CO2,
animations
there's
even.
my office one. And it just like totally one shot it. And maybe I might not have implemented it this way in terms of a design, but I could either talk to it and get different design tips. Or it opens you up to completely different ways of experimenting with this sort of thing. And I don't know. I've had my mind blown several times while doing this.
It's great, but it also like makes me worry about maintainability if I'm not understanding fundamentally what's going on. Am I kind
Yep.
of locked into Cursor now forever? Because
Well, that's why. So you're not locked into Cursor per se, because your output of this is just a Next.js app that you can just host. So you're not locked into Cursor, but you are kind of locked into what you built in terms of it does make it harder to maintain.
yeah,
So that's why, like going into this, if you're building something like this, that you do have to be a little bit more careful. If you're building it from scratch, you're hand doing it, you're going to have something that you understand better, that you're able to maintain better. But at the same time, like there's a chance you could build the end thing you need with this. It kind of depends on how complicated you're going. If you just want, say, a quick little dashboard for some of your users to be able to view, and that dashboard isn't all that complex, there's a chance you can build something completely viable with this. And it's also worth noting that this space, like the cursor, the all the this agent space, the vibe coding space, has an enormous amount of investment going into it right now. So chances are the tools of the future are going to be even more powerful for working with this sort of thing as well. So it's kind of a interesting scenario that we're in.
So TJ, what happens if I go offline, if you will, and I make some major changes to my application, and then I go back into Cursor or any given IDE with this enabled? Is it gonna, how does it process the changes that I've made? Because I assume right now it's got everything it's done in memory in some sort. Like,
Yeah, it does index and it does remember like these chats. So it's going to know the context of all of this. So it'll forget some of it, but it does have the ability to re-index things. That's where the rules that you can provide come in really handy because that's just a way of telling it things. And you can provide those rules at the like the global level, but you can also do project specific ones too. So if you work in a bunch of different projects, you could pop into the rules and tell it different things. A lot of people also use those for things like coding standards. I like my code to be, I don't know, you either tabs and spaces or just ways you like to approach. You could tell it to always write unit tests for the things you're doing, or never write unit tests, or anything like that. That's kind of makes sense for your workflow, but also for what you're building. If I had implemented something, I would probably start by coming in and say like, okay, so here's what I did, and then here's what I want you to do, and I'd probably just give it that context because typically the more specific you can be, the better. Even if you notice some of the commands I told it, these have come from different ways of fooling with a tool. So if like for this request, for example, I told it to load 1,000 events using page size equals 1,000 on the API. And I did that because in previous runs doing this, I found that it likes to build a full filter thing where you can choose different dates, like a start date and an end date and time. And you can get that to work, but it's trickier. It screws up more because then it gets into date parsing logic and whatnot. So I went with a simpler request for the purpose of this webinar because, as you already saw, sometimes this thing screws up or I screw up going through it. So the more just logically you can lay out your requirements, I think the more successful you can be with these two.
um, so
This
a question came in earlier about unit tests, which is a great time to talk about it. Like, uh, to me, this whole arena of AI coding only further emphasizes the need for robust unit testing. You said, TJ, like in your, would that be something you would add to your prompt or your the rules, I guess it is with Cursor, like generate unit tests as you go along, or how would that work?
Yeah, you could either make it into the prompts as you go, or you could say like I could say add unit tests to ensure you load the data and sort by device successfully. And then it'll just add unit tests. It's a little tricky because just like anything else, these things I found that the unit tests they generate are pretty good, but you have to be a little bit careful to make sure you have to check the work of the AI. I feel like that gets into the uh, I don't know, with vibe coding for the most part, you aren't writing a whole lot of tests because the whole point is you're just kind of vibing your way through it. Once you start to get into the unit test realm, that gets into more how you would use these sort of tools in more of a production system scenario. So you can do it. Um, and I find it works pretty decent, but you have to be a little bit more careful because you'll want to review some of the code of what it's doing. And yeah.
Yeah. As with anything else, it's important to understand the fundamentals, I suppose. Um, the question came in through the Q&A asking if anybody has any experience using tools like Cursor in workflows where data is first sent from Notehub to a database, for instance, InfluxDB for storage, and then retrieved from that database to build the dashboards. I mean, that's probably a more common scenario than using the Notehub APIs directly, um, because once you have that data in a third-party storage mechanism, you can use it for anything, whatever sort of interface you're building. And I think just the short answer for that is you're going to need some kind of interface to that data. So you're going to be building out a set of APIs to pull that data into a web application. Now that might be like using something custom that you run locally on the server or through a Lambda. It could be anything really. I mean, I hate to give such a vague answer, but there's a lot of options out there.
Yeah, I've used it with Postgres before, and it's quite good at figuring out. You just basically just spell out what you're doing in here. The one thing, the one thing you would lose is the nice thing of working with an API directly is you can just tell it, here's where the API docs are, and it can just kind of skim and learn that. Whereas with your database, you'll probably have to tell it about your database structure, or maybe you have some code that it already reads from that database that you could just pass it and say, here's how I interact with the database as a first step. So that's the one extra step you would have, and then from there, it should be totally game to do things. The unit testing thing did not work. I just wanted to use this though as a chance to show off one cool thing you can do in Cursor. So when you do get an error like this, like something clearly went wrong, one thing you can do is you can just say like add to chat here. And did it do it? I thought or it's this like deprecation warning or whatever. So you have this, you can add it to the chat. Oh yeah, there it goes. So the lines and say like it didn't work. And it has that as context. So it knows it's talking about that specific error. And so then it'll try to find that error. And that's typically the workflow I use. I didn't hit any errors other than my own stupid error with the env file at the start. But if the app had like completely crashed with some sort of stack trace here, I'll just copy the stack trace or do that bit where I add it to the chat here and then just let Cursor have a go at it and see if it can fix it. And normally it can, although sometimes it can take, 4 or 5 rounds of passing in errors. And I found that it also, interestingly, sometimes will start adding log messages and then asking you to paste the log messages back into it, which is, I don't know why that's so funny to me or just mind blowing to me, but like the bot is adding log messages and you're getting the log messages and passing it to the bot. And
We're
it's a
just like
strange future that we're in, but
just
yeah.
we're the assistant,
Yeah.
right? Like,
Yep, exactly. Um, but yeah, so I think just looking at the time, that's probably where I'll wrap this up. Just in general, so hopefully you found this interesting. Like I said, the demo can be a little bit meandering because every time you open this up, you're going to get something different, which is both a little bit scary, but also kind of exciting about it. This is the workflow I've been using. I've been building several different things for several different types of Notehub projects. And if you do have any other questions, I know Rob has some stuff he's going to end up with. So I'll just bring down my screen here real quick. But feel free to ask questions now. We're around for a bit,
yeah,
or
ask questions.
reach out on our forum if you have questions and you're watching the recording of this later.
I thought it would be nice to kind of sum up a few of my tips and tricks I've learned over the last year or so. And TJ mentioned probably all of these, but just kind of reiterate them, like starting with the fact that keeping things simple, that still applies. If you keep the tasks focused and easy for the LM to comprehend, that's going to be better off. Like TJ mentioned, if you start by throwing your entire code base at it, it can really get off the rails pretty quickly. If you're looking for an easy place to start, I find that sometimes I'll write like an Arduino sketch or something, and I'll throw that entire sketch into ChatGPT and just say, hey, like, can you provide any advice or can you check for any possible runtime errors that I'm missing, anything like that? That's kind of a nice place to start tinkering around. And I still pretty strongly feel like whatever you get back from an AI, you should understand before you deploy it. I know that's like goes against vibe coding principles, but get off my lawn, all that. Um, and there's also a lot of work you can do when you're writing the prompts. I know in OpenAI and ChatGPT land, they're called like system prompts. I think that's the equivalent to cursor rules. But I like including in that is telling the LLM to ask me questions before it starts work. So if a lot of times these LLMs will start making assumptions without your input, and so just being able to answer like 3 to 5 questions can really like head off any major problems. And we already talked about this, but like unit tests are really your friend more than ever. Like if you're not writing them today, you really need to have really solid test coverage when AI starts pushing code that you may or may not be reviewing.
Another one
Um,
I've seen for the prompt engineering front is people say like don't apologize because sometimes if there's a bug, the AI will come in and say like, "Oh man, no, you're right. I totally got that."
yeah,
And you tell it to be more concise, to not apologize. But it just like it's the sort of thing you have to play with just based off your own personal preferences. Just try messing with those system prompts or the cursor rules or whatever to just tune how it works and find what you like interacting with
yeah,
basically.
for sure. I know there were some questions I'm sure that we missed in the chat. We generally don't miss things that show up in the Q&A, but if anybody had any final ones, I know there was a question earlier, or maybe a comment about building an app in Xcode with ChatGPT. That's it's fascinating to me because I don't know if anybody saw that Apple released uh, what's it called, like embedded Swift or Swift for embedded, something like that, which is a just interesting the way like we're progressing here into these using different languages in the embedded space. And then like for me, I actually I while I have some history in the mobile space, I don't know Swift at all. Could I start just writing Swift code through AI to build a mobile app that reads data from the Notehub APIs? Sure, why not? Like it really opens up a lot of different possibilities and makes a lot of new avenues more accessible. Um, and oh, Francis had a question about using I assume you mean Starnote as a feed for this bit of data. Yeah, so Starnote, for those of you who aren't aware, is our satellite product, and Starnote is an accessory for Notecard today, which means that the data is still effectively coming through Notecard and or through Notehub rather. So it appears the same way in Notehub. So when you pull it out, yeah, so it works like literally exactly the same way. Uh, any other questions I missed?
No, I think we're good.
Great, and we're pretty much on time here. Well, thanks everyone for attending. I hope this has been at least somewhat useful as an introduction for you all. I mean, we're all going to still keep playing with these tools. I'm sure we'll have more to share in the future. And if you have any follow-up questions, we do have a forum for Blues questions at discuss.blues.com if you want to check us out there as well. But otherwise, we'll see you next time.
Yeah, thanks everybody.